All right, Sue, thanks for joining me today.
I,
Congratulations too on the publication of, I guess, a recently new book. It came out in September, Five
mhm,
Points on an Invisible Line by Flame Arrow Publishing. We've known each other for a while now, I guess about our books came out the exact same month, the exact same year, our debuts.
yeah,
And so we've kind of been able to follow each other's career over that time. So I'm really glad that we're both still writing and we're both still publishing.
me too.
Yeah. And of course, 5 points on an invisible line is the January selection of the Violet Hour Book Club. And so I thought I'd ask you a few questions just to help our readers along as they prepare for the meeting in January.
Sure.
Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you. And I'm very excited about it being the January book for the club. I love the book club, and I'm very excited.
And the book club loves you. So the book is set in a near future Montreal, right, around a
Mhm.
family of five people who are passionate community activists fighting for social justice in their city. Can you let us know a little bit about the inspiration behind the story?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to mention that it's a sequel, more or less standalone, but so I have to start by the inspiration for the first book, which when it came out was Cycling to Asylum, which I had the idea for in 2008, biking home from work, when it suddenly occurred to me, because I work with immigrants and refugees, and I am myself an immigrant from New York, that if anyone ever had to flee the United States for political reasons, the best way to do it would be by bicycle. And I thought, oh man, that would make a great story. But who would believe anyone would have to flee the United States and get like political asylum? I know, I'll set it in the future and pretend it's science fiction. So that was basically the inspiration for the story. It was kind of partially my own life because we did leave the United States for political reasons, and partially the work I was doing at that time for a number of years with immigrants and refugees. And then after the book came out, a lot of people had asked me if I would if I was going to write a sequel, which surprised me because I didn't feel like the story ended like pretty. It was a pretty solid ending, so I wasn't sure why people were asking me that question. And in fact, it was you, Chris, helped me to understand that because you told me that you thought it's probably about the characters feeling very, very real, and people kind of maybe had the idea I wasn't done with them yet. And I thought, oh, all right, that makes sense. But I really didn't have a sequel in mind at that point. But then I was doing some work, some political work in Montreal, some anti fascist work, some border solidarity work. And that inspired me with, okay, actually, let's revisit these characters a few years later, getting involved politically, fighting fascism, each in their own way. And then I will get to actually revisit the one little thread I left hanging, which was the relationship between Lake, one of my main characters, and his best friend Philip, which might have taken a romantic turn had he remained in New York, and the possibility of a polyamorous relationship between him and his partner Janie and Philip, which she sort of actually suggests in her epilogue to Cycling. And that was kind of what motivated me to write the second book.
So, I mean, you're reimagining Montreal here. Like you said, you decided to kind of set it in the near future. It's interesting too how this like the cycling your first book, which was I should also just say was republished by Flame Arrow with a new title, Invisible
Yeah.
Line. But it's just so prescient. I mean, I think, we think about what's kind of currently happening politically in the world. You kind of almost saw it coming. Can you talk a little bit about well, I have a bunch of questions for you, but like maybe let's start with like Montreal. What was it like for you to kind of like set it in a near future Montreal, and how did you go about creating the differences in that city versus the one we currently live in now?
Yeah, I mean, it was great for me. As an immigrant, in cycling, I got to write about the two cities I knew and loved, and I followed a kind of I like dystopia and I also like utopia, and I love stories that combine the two. So in cycling, I got to show New York. I mean, in all of what's intense and great about it, but also all that's very, very dark about it. So it took the role of like dystopia in the story, and I decided I would put Montreal in a role of light utopia. Because, you know, when you're an immigrant, especially if you've come to a place for very specific reasons, you're leaving another place like we were for reasons that, like, we were not feeling very hopeful about the future there. You come to a new place that you've chosen, and it's like in the beginning, you're seeing everything with rose-colored glasses, like everything. Oh my God, it's so much greener here. Oh my God, it's so much queerer here. Oh my God, it's so much, people are so much nicer. The transit system works, you know, and you see all these, and you're just always comparing, which is actually could be kind of annoying for other people, for me to constantly saying, you think that's bad, you should see how it is in New York. But anyway, I did that a lot. I was comparing the two cities quite a lot, and all the things that I saw that were positive in Montreal, which a lot of them were things that were just better or different than in New York, I just pushed a bit forward to try to make them even more hopeful. You know, so the city had even better bike paths, and it was even greener, and there was even more solidarity. And I made Montreal a international sanctuary city. I had it declared an international sanctuary city, and I just tried to look at all the things that I thought were really interesting about Montreal and push it even further. You know, not to say that Montreal is like this, but more like, let's try this. This could be interesting. Let's try to make things better. And it's interesting what you said before about like cycling being prescient, because a lot of people said things like that to me. Oh my gosh, because it came out at the time of Ferguson, and it begins with a very violent scene with the police, and I was like, yeah, we actually had police violence before. This is not new. Ferguson is not new. The press, you know, the amount of press it got was new. So a lot of the things that people say, oh, you were prescient, was like, you know, I think it's the old dirty secret of science fiction writers, especially those of us who write the near future, is that we're not writing about the future, we're writing about the present, but we're just noticing things more intensely. But the one thing that I did is in making Montreal a sanctuary city, it was declared a sanctuary city a year after my book came out. And so I always pretend to take credit for that. Although honestly, we're not really a sanctuary city. We got a long ways to go until we are. But yeah, it was really fun playing with some ideas about how things could look better here in Montreal. And as an outsider, you know, I have an outsider and an insider view of the city, which I think is helpful in writing about it.
So you mentioned like this, of course we know this is a sequel. We've been talking a lot about cycling to Asylum, aka Invisible Line. We're reading the sequel, Five
Right.
Points on an Invisible Line, but which is kind of being marketed also as a standalone book that you don't necessarily have to have read the first. But can you maybe, some Violet Hour readers might be concerned about having to read the first book to fully enjoy the second. And I was hoping you could maybe speak to a little bit about that. Is there anything a person really should know, before reading the second novel, especially if they haven't or don't have plans to read the first?
Um, I mean, I think eventually in the book, everything you need to know does come forward. I think the main advantage of having read the first book is you're going to have much deeper characterization of each of the characters, but you're going to get the fact that, okay, you know, Lake and Janie and the two kids had to flee, that Lake has a dark and traumatic past, that he's suffering from some PTSD from what happened to him in the past, that him and Philip, you know, have this bond that hasn't yet been, you know, realized. Um, and I guess one thing is with the character of Siri, who's the older kid, who in this story is 15 going on 16, that she was the one who, there was a whole plot in cycling about how angry she was about the move until she understood what was going on. But she has sort of a history of rebelling against her parents, I guess, which is something that you could sort of see resolving or moving forward in the story. Um, what else? Um, I don't know. I think most of it does come out during the course of the story, the things that people really, really do need to know. I mean, obviously, you know, Lake is, well, um, his sexuality is, he's both um, well, polyamorous, and also um, I was gonna, sorry, I'm having trouble thinking of this word right now. Polysexual, that's not the word I'm looking for. Sorry. But
Pansexual
and
or?
Pansexual, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm having this in my brain. But and is a very kind of unusual character who's had a lot of things happen in his life. I suppose I might talk a little bit about the relationship with him and Janie, where she met him when he was a unhoused youth sleeping in parks, just like really like 15, 16 years old, and she's several years older than him. Um, and you know, and their relationship is very intense. And she is a little, at least, you know, sees herself also as maybe having to take care of everybody, which is one of her character arcs, you know, that we'll see develop. Um, yeah, and you know, you see the character development of the kids a lot too, because they're older in the story. You know, Simon is a kind of unusual, precocious, but also sort of clueless, socially clueless kid who we see him developing in the second book in various ways as an artist. And I won't give too much away, but you see some, you learn a lot more about Simon as well in the story the second time. But yeah, I do believe people can read 5 points easily without having read cycling, and people have, and for like, yeah, it's fine. But I also do think that, you know, the characterizations are richer when you've already read the first book.
So you mentioned polyamory and also like your main character is pansexual. This is, I think, the first book that we're reading in the club that tackles the subject of polyamory. And that's also something, part of the reason why we picked it is also is that it'll allow us to kind of have a conversation a bit about that. Can you speak a little bit about like how that became such a central part of the story?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an idea I've thought about a lot. It, just as a political matter, as a social matter, I've always felt like um, why you know, why monogamy? Like, why does that make sense? Why can't you love more than one person? Why can't you imagine relationships with more than one adult that might like be stronger and strengthen? You know, I've written about polyamory in more than one novel. It was also actually front and center in Run J Run, my second novel. And you know, in that story, one of the character Annie says to my main character, I have two children. Do I not love my first child because I now have a second child? Like, can I love both of my children? Why can't I love two partners too? You know, so for me, I feel it's one of these ways that, you know, as with my political values, I feel like we need to break away from these, what I think are kind of false limitations that are, I mean, some people just want to be monogamous and that's fine. That's how they feel, that's fine. But people should also be free to have other types of relationships, you know, in an ethical way. And so, and I think as a person who identifies as somewhat like anarcho-socialist, it's just consistent with my politics, and it's why I feel like all my books are very political, and I like to focus on a lot of different things. It's not just one thing. One of the things about one of the thematics in 5 Points on an Invisible Line is the many ways people can act in the world, can fight fascism, can try to build a better, juster place. Not just, you could do it as an artist, you could do it as a lawyer, you could do it as an activist. There's lots of ways of doing things, and there's lots of issues you can be working on. And our personal relationships have political overtones too. The second reason that I became somewhat obsessed with the idea is through the character of Lake, and I've written other characters like him. He is definitely a person who requires many people to love him and help keep him sane. And I want to show sort of how that works. And his, if he has only one main partner, it's actually a lot of work to be Lake's partner. And Janie, aside from being attracted to Philip and being interested in him in that way, also is very happy to have a little help. Like, you know, maybe she doesn't have to actually take care of everyone, her partner, her kids, her clients. You know, maybe there's someone else who could be more like her, who's more like a caregiver, because Philip and Janie are both caregivers. That's one thing they have in common. They like to protect people. And so that's, I think, some of the reasons I wrote about polyamory.
You know, so another subject that we're going to be able to discuss a little bit in the book club is like a speculative fiction, like you know, as a genre. And I know that like it's you know, you're talking about you're writing a lot about politics. The you I believe it's been used, the term hope punk has also been kind of used to describe
Yeah.
this work as well. Can you talk a little bit about like why these genres kind of appeal to you so much and what you can do with it as a writer?
Yeah. And just to be clear, term hope punk didn't exist when cycling first came out, so I call it proto hope punk. But I was more consciously thinking about hope punk when I wrote 5 Points. A lot of people misunderstand what hope punk is. They think it's all these like fluffy, hopeful, overly optimistic stories. It's not. That's not what it's supposed to be. Don't forget about the punk part. So you start like in a situation, punk stories tend to be anti-capitalist. They tend to be written about people struggling at the margins, and kind of collectively working towards a better future, pushing back, even if they can't make huge changes, just to start. And what distinguishes hope punk is by the end of the story, there's some sense of a hopeful path, a little bit of light. It may not be, oh my God, we've just solved, everything. It's more like, here's a path, and here's how we do it, by working together, by struggling, by being solidaire instead of competitive with one another. That's what hope punk is. It's kind of takes its aesthetics from kind of a do it yourself, punk community aesthetic. And yeah, and it's pushing against the margins. And I put quite a lot of that into 5 Points, trying to show, I mean, the polyamorous union and the family that they try to build together is one alternative community structure, but I also try to show it on a more macro level with the kind of network of cooperatives and organizations and political groups that join together and try to make things happen, which again include artists and doctors and lawyers and workers of all kinds and youth and elderly people. And it's something that interests me quite a lot in life. And I feel like um, I think speculative fiction is important because if we're trying to build a better world, we have to first be able to imagine a better world. And I feel like that's what speculative fiction does. It lets you imagine, even if not a better world, it starts you off on a path by saying, let's imagine a world that isn't this world. And if you start there, you could start even imagining maybe better worlds. So yeah, and it also satisfies the fact that I've always liked both dystopia and utopian stories, because dystopian stories obviously are like clang, 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 here's an alarm bell, we need to look at this. And I think that's really important to do in fiction. And then the utopian ones are like, how about this? Let's follow that path. And I find either one of them by themselves a little bit unsatisfactory. I like combining the two of them. So Hope Punk's a little like that.
All right, so you've been to a few Violet Hour book club meetings. You won't be at this one,
Yep.
obviously, for obvious reasons. What do you hope readers take away from the book?
um, Huh. I mean, obviously, I hope they like the book. I hope they take away from it the idea of writing things, trying to write a world that's a little bit different than the world we have, as a way of playing with ideas and trying on ways of maybe making the world a better place. Um, I hope they, like, for people in the Violet Hour who don't read speculative fiction, I hope it will expand their understanding of what it is. It's not just spaceships going beep, 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 beep. It could be a lot more than that. I hope people will appreciate the thematics in the book. I hope people talk about why it's called 5 Points on an Invisible Line, for instance, and how that relates to the first book, Invisible Line, which, as you pointed out, it wasn't originally named that, but the French version was named Les Lignes Invisibles because there's an obvious thematic with the border and all that. But in 5 Points, I'm going somewhere else with the invisible line, and I hope people will be interested, in talking about that, and the characters. And oh yeah, well, I mean, also kind of showing what the limits and strengths are of a multiple point of view, first person, present tense narrative, which people will see as they read. I start doing weird things with that. I hope that will be something that people think work, and or at least think are interesting. So those are some of my thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to write a five-person POV novel for the last couple of years, so my hat is off to you. I think you really did a great job with that. So that's definitely something I'll be bringing up at the club. All right. Well, thank you, Sujay. I really appreciate you chatting today about this, and looking forward to having the further conversation about the book later on in January. All right. Thanks
Thanks,
everyone
Chris.
for tuning in. Thank you, Sujay.
All right. Take care. Bye.